I want to give you some value in this podcast, and thank you for listening. So let me give you something useful right now. Most men don't struggle because they're weak. They struggle because they're unclear. So not being clear. That's why I built the Manhood Mastery Quiz. It takes only 2 minutes, and it shows you exactly where you're crushing it and where life is crushing you, and what actually deserve your focus next. So you will get instant results, no email rabbit hole, just a clear snapshot of your life as a man today. Take the quiz, links in the show notes. Clarity is power, and power changes everything. So today's conversation is for anyone who feels stuck in their marriage or relationship, and they're tired of waiting for things to change and quietly wondering, is this as good as it gets? And I know I've been there several times. And my guest, Dr. Lee Baucom, has spent over 2 decades helping people turn struggling marriages around, often without their partner being on board. This is what fascinates me. So his work is practical, grounded, and built on a powerful idea. When one person changes how they show up, the entire relationship system shifts. So this is a conversation about ownership, leadership, desire, and what real change actually looks like when no one's coming to save you. So let's get into this.
Morgan, we've already started it, right? You've already talked about your place with me before we even hit record. So you want to get back to that?
Let's get back to that. So why I'm so stoked about having this conversation is because I've been struggling in my marriage for many years, having kids, not sleeping, a lot of stress, not finding the time or creating time to connect, to plan. And we're both not like linear people that are super structured. We are a little bit spontaneous. So it's been a lot. And I've tried to get on board with creating a life vision for ourselves. And it was just like super hard to drag my wife to do the things that I wanted to do that had to do with the relationship that I thought would just like put us in a great space together. So I was like, heck, she's not coming on board. Maybe she's tired. She feels pushed all the time because I'm like, come on, please, we got to do it. I've been nagging for 2 years. Let's do this vision quest or vision a life book system from Mind Valley or whatever it was. And then I just started doing the work myself, going to therapy, going to retreats, setting up my own visions. And I don't know, but somehow we came into a much better place. And it just keeps improving. But the thing is that I am changing. I'm the variable that's changing. And I see that has an effect on the whole family. My kids, my wife, my relationship with my siblings, in my company, just how I show up in the world.
So let me introduce you to a concept. Emotional reactance is the term. So that comes from psychology. And this emotional reactance is the idea that even if you think what somebody's telling you to do would be best for you, if you feel like they're pressuring you into it, you will resist. It's kind of the human nature of us that if we feel pushed, even in a good direction, we pull back. And so your story is exactly that. What you changed in that was saying, I can do that. I have responsibility. I have the ability to do things differently. And so when you changed it, you changed the system. I often talk about it like it's a dance, right? You've got your dance steps. Y'all learned those long ago. But then you changed your dance step. And whenever you change your dance step, it changes the other person's dance step just because you're in that system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that metaphor. And if we could zoom out for a second, how would you describe what you do and the journey that led you to this point in your career?
Yeah. So part of what I realized long ago was one of the things that you named. You talked about those experts. And one of the pieces of those puzzles is that they're always assuming that two people are working on this together, right? And that's an easy one. I always love it when I have somebody who is that way, somebody who is willing to work with a partner because it makes me look good. It's going to be easy. Right. The real problem is when that's not the case. And when that's not the case, then we have to find another way forward. And the fact is that most programs work on the fact that both people are going to try. My assumption is that's not the case.
So I'm in my 40s now, early 40s, turning 42 in a couple of months. And there are so many friends getting divorced. And I speak to every one of them. And I always ask this question. So when did you know if they were the one to leave? So when did you know that this relationship wasn't good for you or that you wanted to leave? And the answer is staggering, because it's always like, yeah, I knew 17 years back, or I knew at the altar when I said yes to him that this was a bad idea. So why are we suffering through this prolonged breakup?
Yeah. There are two answers to that. One is the fact that when we are in a painful situation, we think through that pain. Like, I remember back through the pain. If I am in a depressed mood, I'm going to think back of all the times I was depressed. If I'm in a happy mood, I'm going to think about all the happy things in the past. And so one of the things that happens is that people think back emotionally anyway. And that may be a piece of what you're seeing, is they're thinking back on the point when they're so tired of this and it's so much pain that they are thinking back on, well, it's always been this way, right? So there is some mythology to that. The other piece, though, is that we often, when people do make that wrong choice, they often do know it earlier. They're just not willing to say that. So I've had some people who told me very early on, I didn't want to go through the marriage, but we'd already paid for everything. We'd already set it up. You know, it's just so hard it's like the pressure of that was coming in. And so there is some reality in situations to that, but many times it's simply a looking back at it from the frame where they're in now. They're in pain now. They look back in pain. If they were in a good place, they would look back at a good place. So a couple of things are going on at the same time there.
And there's this other thing that I always hear from my friends. Both are agreeing on going to a couples therapist or a counselor, and it ends up like a shit show. It ends up like a nagging session. What is going on here? What is this the right way to go about things? Or how does a great relationship counseling session look like? I haven't seen one, for sure.
Well, statistically, there aren't many.
All right.
So, let's start with that.
Let's start with that.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons that I left. I call myself a recovering therapist. I don't do therapy now. I do coaching. And that happened really in the midst of me finishing my training for therapy. I was going, what is wrong with this model? Why are we seeing such bad results? I was watching it with all my colleagues, my mentors, my supervisors were not having any better success. And so I started kind of going, what's wrong here? I mean, if this is like, as soon as somebody says we got a marriage problem, their next thing is, so let's go to therapy. I mean, it's 1-2. We have a problem. Let's go to therapy. And the statistics are not real good, which is why it's always interesting to me that it's still that first stop. 50% of people who go to marriage therapy still end up divorced. That's very roughly the same as the general population. There's no intervention that's working there. When they actually survey couples, depending on the survey, somewhere between 10 to 15% say they got any use out of it. It was helpful at all. And this is followed out several years where that statistic sticks. So go to your doctor and the doctor says, I think you need to have this procedure. About 50% of the people who have this procedure die anyway. And, only about 10 to 15% see that there's an improvement. It's going to be hard to convince you to jump onto that, but that's true for therapy.
Yeah, I'd look for another doctor.
Well, so there's the problem, right? And what it raises is several problems with therapy. One is the doctor. So one is the therapist. There are a lot of therapists who are doing marital work who are not trained to do marital work. That's just who's coming to their office. And because of the way we license in the United States, and I've talked with people overseas, same kind of thing. Once you're licensed, you can see who you want to. So they're not trained to think of the relationship, the couple. So that's the first problem. The second is they often default to communication is the problem. And communication isn't the problem. It's a symptom of the problem. So we've got that issue.
Is it okay if we can unpack that? Because
yeah, sure.
I hear that all the time. You should just communicate. in all the self-help Instagram channels, they always talk about like communication as this holy grail for fixing your marriage or relationships or whatever. So what is the actual problem?
So it's disconnection. Communication is a method of relaying something. It's an informational tool, but that's all it is. So I've had couples in my office and they'll come in and they'll say, we need help with our communication. I'll sit there and listen to them for 25, 30, 35 minutes. And I'll then say, I've understood everything you've said, every word you've said, every sentence you've said, you've understood it together. So communication is not your problem. What you're communicating is the problem, which is where we talk about this fact that the problem is disconnection, not miscommunication, but disconnection. And the disconnection leads them to be communicating from a disconnected space, and disconnection leads to pain because we as humans are needing that connection. We're desperate for that deep connection. And when it's not there, first, it causes pain because it's supposed to be there. And second, it causes us to kind of look elsewhere for where else we can feel that. It's just so necessary in our DNA.
So how do we get connected? Because I hear from so many women that the men are so lousy at communicating. We are just expressing less words. And this is a follow-up question. Who communicates better? This is a lousy question, but who communicates better, men or women, generally?
So we do know that women overall use more words than men. I mean, that's been shown in research.
It's like 3 times more than men, right?
That doesn't mean their communication capacity is better. It's just what they're communicating. And so that's one of the mistakes we've made is that there is this, so the women are communicating better than the men. That's not necessarily true. I've seen plenty of situations where the communication, there may be more wordage, but that doesn't mean the communication is better. And what's being communicated is still the issue. Whether you're speaking a third or 3 times as much, however, whichever side you are on that, if you're still communicating disconnection, that's a problem. Then it's just, if you're really communicating connection, that is different, and it doesn't take a lot of words. So let's unpack that a little bit more. I believe that there are 3 levels to this connection, and only one of them is purely verbal. The other 2 are a mixture, or one is not at all verbal. And that's physical touch. So let's just start there. Physical touch is probably the most basic of our ways of connecting. We do that with every warm-blooded creature. My dog loves to be connected with me by being up against me, right? That's what it understands. It doesn't, or she is not big on conversations about how my day went, but cuddle her, right? And sure, she wags her tail, but I don't think she understands what I'm saying, just the tone I'm using. That's still kind of a non-word, non-verbal. So touch, loving touch is a basic level of connection. And that is true between men and women, between husband and wife, between spouses, with our kids. I mean, I hug my friends, that's physical touch, right? So that's connection. The next level up is emotional connection. And emotional connection still isn't all about the words. As you're nodding at me, you're using nonverbal communication to say, yeah, I got you. We're on the same side on this. And so we use a lot of nonverbal cues on the emotional connection. Emotional connection is feeling like someone gets you and you get them, feeling like they support you and you support them, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing or just a normal day, right? It's just that feeling of, okay, we're together in this. That's an emotional piece. And sure, there are words that we use when we reflect back on how someone's day is. And when we get past how was your day? I had 3 meetings. Okay, let's eat dinner. There's not a lot of connection there, right? That's reporting.
Yeah.
And what we're really talking about is rapporting, how you create the rapport between you, verbal, nonverbal. Then there's spiritual connection. And spiritual connection is all about what are our deepest values, what's most important to us, where do we want to go in life. It also includes when I say this, people like religion. Well, no, but yes, I mean, it includes that. It's just not that. It's more than that. It's our deepest self. It's where lots of people fall in love, and it is all verbal. But lots of couples tell me about that communication time they had, that time that they had that long conversation where they talked about the family they came from, their dreams in life, what scares them, what hopes they have. All of those things are where our deepest part that we don't just chat with anybody else about. That's spiritual connection. That's purely verbal. So we talk about those 3 levels. There's only one that requires us just to be talking. The other 2 are, one is not at all verbal. The other is partially verbal.
And on that point, physical touch, because I'm super comfortable with touch. And I live in Sweden, where people are so uncomfortable with touching each other. Why is that?
Those are cultural norms. And the question, I guess, for this is whether that is true within a relationship. If you're uncomfortable with each other touching, that is different than is it just a cultural norm. But I do think that there are obviously some cultural normative things about how you touch. I mean, I find in the United States, it's a mix, right? And so there's some people who just want to fist bump. Other people want to hug. And other people just like, don't get near me. So there's a wide range here. It's just the homogeneity of a culture probably says more about what the standards are for touch there. That's different though within a relationship. How much physical connection any couple wants is less the question than whether they are getting the amount that they do want. If you're matched up, and there are plenty of couples who are like, yeah, we don't cuddle that much. There's not a whole lot of physical touch, but they're both okay with that. That still works for them. The problem is when one is needing more physical contact and the other is like, I'm tapped out.
Tapped out. I love that expression because that is what you do when you train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, because I love those sports because you're getting a lot of physical touch and I'm tapping out and another guy is tapping out. So
I'll give you a little insight. When I was doing jujitsu, one of my theories was, I stopped training when we moved because I left the gym, but one of my theories was the people who were most attracted to that, physical touch is their, what they call their love language. Yeah.
Yes.
But
my love language number 1 is physical touch. I love martial arts.
So I would say this to people and they're like, well, how can you say that? Because you guys are fighting. And I'm like, you're really not, because as soon as you're in trouble, you just go tap, tap, I'm done. And you start again and you pat it, slap hands and move on, as opposed to when I used to do Taekwondo. And there was a little flares of anger when somebody would land a punch just because your natural reaction, and they, you're not pulling the punches as much in that. But in jiu-jitsu, you could go full force as hard as you want, knowing that tap, tap, and you're going to stop and reset.
Yeah. I also did Taekwondo. That is what I started with. So yeah,
me too.
So cool to hear. So in your practice, when you are coaching, not what do you call it? Like therapeuting people.
Yeah. Therapizing them.
Therapizing them. We got to create a new word for that. So when you're coaching couples, what are the biggest emphasis that you put while meeting couples? Or tell me a little bit about how you work. Is it like only like 1-to-1, or do you need them to be both together? You said you can do it by yourself, but like what emphasis do you put?
So if you're doing marital therapy, you can't do marital therapy unless both people are in that room. Relationship coaching you can do with whoever is willing to be coached on that process, which is one of the...
So what's the difference?
Yeah. So marital therapy is trying to help a couple move through their difficult places, often by looking back on their difficult places. I mean, that's a rear view mirror. And I don't want to say this is an exclusive thing, but for the most part, therapy is what's happened back there. Let's take that apart and figure out where things went wrong. And then let's figure out how to move forward. Coaching is often about, well, where do you want to get to? Let's be aware of what's gotten in the way in the past, but let's not get so focused on that we're stuck there. So what's our course forward? I always felt like in many ways, the people who came into my office were trying to drive their car that way, looking in the rearview mirror that way as they were doing therapy. I mean, it was just kind of a natural thing. So they would come in and have the same fight they had this week right in front of me, hoping that I would solve it. But what they really wanted, I think, was for me to choose a side that was right and explain that to the person. And so there is this hidden expectation that the therapist is going to say, oh, you were right about that. And that's part of the poison of it. And so coaching is about, even with one person, is basically saying, where do you want to get to? And what are you willing to do about this? So most of the people I see are working on their own, just like you were doing in your relationship, to figure out how they can show up differently, how they can create connection differently. Because remember that term I threw out in the beginning, that emotional reactance? That's
Yeah.
the sabotage. It's rare that in therapy, both people want equally to be there. One person often feels like they've been coerced or forced to be there. And so that creates an extra resistance. In fact, in my observation, they ended up trying to prove that they were right about there's nothing that could happen in the relationship. And so they began to be more stubborn of their opinion as it went on, and it sabotaged the process. Coaching, I mean, I've said to people, in order for me to talk to both of you, you both have to be willing to move forward. And I'll get on the call, and it's clear to me that somebody has been kind of forced in there. And I'll just say, I'm sorry, we're not going to continue this conversation. This is not helpful. There is no magic in the therapist or a coach to be able to convince somebody to work on the relationship. That has to be something they're ready to do, or you build towards that so that they are then wanting to be a part of that relationship.
I want to be really clear with something. This podcast doesn't grow because of me. It grows because you choose to follow it. Every time you do, it gives the show a little bit more reach, a little bit more weight. And that's what opens doors to deeper conversations and remarkable guests. So if you haven't followed yet, consider this an invitation, not to support me, but to help shape what this becomes. We're building something for people who want to live deliberately, think freely, and create life on their own terms. If that resonates, you're already part of it. Hit follow, and thank you for carrying this with me. My mind is going in so many different directions, and I'm like remembering stuff that I've gone through. So when someone is coming to you, and let's take men, for example, what are the areas where men needs most focus or strengthening or development? Do you see like common themes?
Not as much on gender. I've seen from both sides the same complaints each way. When I first started my career, one of the things that stood out more than now, and this would have been 35 years ago now when I was in the office, there was much more of a men are sold out to their job and women are sold out to the family kind of feeling to it. And that wasn't it wasn't that the men had nothing to do at home and the women had nothing to do at work. It's just where their minds were. That has changed a lot especially in the last decade, where I watch the fathers be sometimes equally involved in the household and the wives being equally responsible for outside the home. So there's a lot more commonality now. However, there are still some remnants that I think are left with us from how we were raised. There are lots of men who would tell me that they had no good example of how to do this. You know, they're still trying to figure out what it means to be a good father, a present father. And the same for women telling me I didn't have a good model for how to include that. And so there's some turf struggles that go on, and there's also some how do I stand up and be a part of this. But it's less clear than it used to be. That used to be a very clear issue in the past, and now not so much. I do have a basic theory that couples who do well are committed to being what I call being a we. We are in this together. We're a team. Not that we lose ourselves to that, but we bring our best self. So I always think that the sports analogy makes sense to most people. If I play pickleball now, and so if I'm playing pickleball, my partner is my partner to win the game, not my opponent to fuss at about why did they miss the ball or what's wrong with them. But for me to say, how can I and you work together the best to win this game? So I've got to do my best. I've watched, it's interesting dynamics to watch two people playing. I've watched when, say, there's a mismatch. You know, there's a pretty good player with a lesser player, and the pretty good player just is like, I'm not even going to try. Because they're not going to be able to carry the game. I'm not even going to try. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. Or for one person to be so critical of the other that they lose the game. This was a year and a half ago. I stepped up into the advanced level just to see if I could handle it. And I had a guy who came up and said, I'm going to be your partner. I don't want to play with that person. I went, okay, my first time here. And I realized why. So as we were playing, these two better players than us, he and I were both intermediate, these two better players, I watched as one of the better players just started chastising the other for every mistake they were making. And I watched them just go down. And so two lesser players won that game against them because they weren't working as a team. They weren't showing up as their best self. And I'm sitting there going, I've seen that in the office many times where they get so involved in competing with each other on who's the best or who's making the mistakes that they can't be focused on how do we want to work together as a team.
And on that, so what happens psychologically and emotionally when someone drops blame and takes full ownership? That is what I'm hearing from your analogy.
That is exactly it. So when you got out of the how can I change you frame to what can I do for myself frame, that's quite a shift in the pressuring, right? That the other person doesn't feel oh, you think I'm a bad person. You think I'm not doing well. You think I'm not holding up my end. I mean, there's a lot of messaging that comes with that. But B, it allowed you to actually do something that was within your control. You were trying to do something that was completely outside of your control of getting your spouse to do any changing, but you don't have that capacity. I believe that there are only three things that we can control, and the other person is not it. So that's where you stepped into what can I do? How can I be controlling what I can control? And so in that, you step into where you can make changes. The other person goes, wow, you're showing up differently. It feels differently, and they're able to be different in that process.
And how do you help people move from me versus you thinking to seeing like the marriage as a system and that we are a team?
Yeah. So sometimes when I give an explanation, they're able to start to see and compare. So if I say, you guys are the team, you're together in this, but you don't control the other player, right? You only control your side of the court and what you do. That can be a shift. When I talk about the three things they can control, they can usually start going, okay, well, I've been trying to control things I can't actually control. And so there's a piece of it that's just giving it enough awareness. One of the things I think we do a really bad job of all around is getting people prepared for marriage. It just doesn't happen. I mean, the most that happens is a little premarital counseling. And the problem with that is people who go to premarital counseling think they've already got it down. I know because I did it for years and I met against that all the time. I would often say, how is it? If I go down the street and ask, what is the rate of divorce in the U.S., there are not many people who can't tell me.
Yeah.
And
true.
Yet here they go to go get married, thinking they've already got the odds beat. And so my question was, why do you think you've got that beat? Because we've got real love. We don't have whatever didn't work for them. We have it for real. And that's the problem is they think that love's going to carry it. So they're not really ready to hear it, but there also are not many ways to hear it. Go to a couple of premarital sessions or maybe a weekend if, some place of faith is holding some event, but that's about it. And so we send them blindly into the world to go do on-the-job training with nobody to supervise it. So you make your mistakes and you get stuck in your mistakes because nobody's there to say, hey, you might not want to do that. You might want to do it differently. Everywhere else, I mean, you go to the job, there's somebody who's helping you figure out the best way to do a job. If you go into some trade, you've got a mentor who's looking over your shoulder and telling you how to adjust that. Same with therapy training. I had somebody who's watching what I was doing going, hey, you might want to try this and don't do that. But we don't have that in marriage. And so we just get into the pattern and start creating the same mistakes over and over.
Like having a driver's license, but for getting married. So where do you get this premarital coaching or training? Is there a great system out there in your mind, or what do you think?
Yeah. So, what I felt like my job was when I was doing the premarital work was to create an opening and identify some places they might see where there are troubles so that they would come back earlier, not later. And I would always say, come back for the 1 year, 10,000 mile tune-up. Let's talk about it after a year. Very few took me up on it because I had created an opening. And so they often came 2, 3, 4, 5 years later when they were in an earlier stage of crisis. There are some places that have tried to put together compatibility tests, but almost always, no.
Can I share something here? So like during my darkest time in my relationship, I was going through, okay, are we compatible when it comes to love languages? No. Are we compatible when it comes to life vision? No. Are we compatible when it comes to the 6 human needs that Tony Robbins talks about? So I was like going through all of these different, like even the Ayurvedic system of body composition. Like there are so many things out there. What should we focus on? Is there anything that we can put our attention on? Is it anything that will help us, or is it all just nonsense? So like help me just navigate here, because I speak to a lot of people and this podcast is reaching a lot of people. We need some help. We need some guidance here. It doesn't matter how much Esther Perel and Tony Robbins or Dr. John Gray I've been listening to. Nothing helped until I just started focusing on myself, changing the man in the mirror, as Michael Jackson would have said.
Which is, I mean, so you started at the place where you did have control. That's the first thing I'd point out. But there are a couple of things you threw in there that are not, they weren't ever intended about compatibility as much as lenses to view something. So for instance, the love languages, it wasn't whether you had matching love languages as much as you were trying to be bilingual in your spouse's love language, right? Can I understand when my spouse is doing something that means I love you, as opposed to me going, well, why aren't you, I'm touch. Why aren't you touching me, right? Why aren't you more physical with me? And that, and by the way, just to kind of point out, the person who created that, Gary Chapman, is very clear that he's not talking about sex with touch. When I say that, often that's where people go. It's touch, truly touch.
No,
hugs.
It's not. Yeah.
And if it is yours, you know that, and those everybody else assumes, right? So anyway, his point was that you could learn to speak a spouse's love language and hear it. That's why he uses that language thing. So it's not a compatibility. The fact is, when you're falling in love, most of the time couples speak all 5 as loudly as they can, right? And then they start drifting back to what is the bigger one for them, just out of time essence, if nothing else. You're when you're putting all your energy into winning this person over, you're doing everything you can. And then when you're back to life, which is where the problem hits, you hit the pause button, and then you're lucky if you're speaking that one love language. But if there is not the same language, then you've got a translation problem. There's a lens. Tony Robbins is a great lens too, because it's a great thing of asking, what is missing? Am I missing variety? Am I missing sameness? Am I feeling connection? Am I feeling significance? Am I making a contrast? I mean, those are lenses to use for going, where am I not tapping into where I could? In a relationship, his thing is, and if you want to use that as a framing, if you have 3 of those things, it becomes addictive. So if you're asking your question of how to use that in a relationship, how can you bring variety and sameness and connection and significance, just those 4, into the relationship? You should have a pretty potent relationship. But again, that already named of me going, how can I bring that in? How can I bring in my significance, my connection? How can I make sure my spouse is feeling connection? How can I say, hey, you know what? Sometimes we'll go on vacation to the same place because the sameness is important, but sometimes we might try something new that's exciting because variety is important. And again, that's me making some choices in how I would show up. I can't speak much to the Ayurvedic kind of stuff, but I'm sure there's some lensing there that could be useful.
Yeah, there are lensing things, mostly to understand the health and maybe like a little bit of a psychological profile. But I want to ask you, what are some bad advice that you hear often within this space?
Almost everything around communication is a problem.
Do you have any specifics?
Yeah. The I feel kind of statements, right? I statements. There is nothing inherently wrong with an I statement. If you're using that, though, as the crutch to communication rather than looking at the connection, you do that I statement because what you're supposed to say is, I feel this when you do this. I would prefer it if you would do this, right? That's the formula. Instead of saying, you're a real jerk when you do this. That's what you're trying to not do, right? Yeah. The problem is if the disconnection is there, you do that about 3 or 4 times, and what they hear is, you're a jerk when you do this. I mean,
exactly.
They're going right to that. And so I statements are fine as a tool. They're just not going to fix. They're going to help if there's connection there.
and they just start sounding like a therapist. It doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel real. It's just like, so yeah, when I hear, yeah, I hear you, I'm like, okay, they're not hearing me.
Yeah. Well, and so I hear you is always followed with but.
But exactly, we said it at the same time.
Yeah. So that's basically saying, I heard the word you said. I don't have any agreement with it. This is my thoughts. And instead of I hear you, let me think about that. And that being a conversation connection point, which is possible. We're still at that underlying piece, though. If you're disconnected, the techniques and the tricks are coming through disconnection, and they're going to be heard that way. They're going to be experienced that way. Some other big ones, date night. If you're in a troubled relationship, not a good idea. Marriage intensives. If you're in a disconnected relationship, bad idea. Big romantic getaways. If you're disconnected, bad idea. It's not that those by themselves are bad things as much as they're being used as a way of fixing something that they are ahead of. Let's go back with just the date night. What I usually watch is somebody say, we need to do date night. We're not spending enough time together, so let's do date night. And the other person's going, crap, there's a lot of pressure on that. I'm going to have to dress up. We're going to have to go somewhere nice. We're going to have to talk together. And there's all this romantic stuff that is expected of me now. And I don't feel like connecting. So there's the pressure, as opposed to a couple who is very connected going, hey, let's go on a date on Saturday night. That sounds great because we like being together. We have things to talk about. You have to get to that point before you do those things. They're not the lead off.
And please, once again, can you just share how do we get connected in 3 simple steps? What were the 3 points? So we just repeat. Repetition is the mother of skill.
So let's call them 3 bullseyes, right? Yeah. I can aim for these 3 things: physical connection, emotional connection, spiritual connection.
Yes.
What I watch is that sometimes couples come in and they are still doing one, maybe partially, but often they're limping along on, and spiritual is almost always missing. They're no longer talking about their dreams and their hopes. They're no longer talking about their fears because they don't have that intimacy. So that is almost always fallen by the wayside. So physical touch, we don't start with, let's go get you into a passionate lovemaking, but can you touch each other on the arm? Can you hold hands? Can you side hug even? Can you do what's the maximum amount for the minimal connection you have? Can you start growing that? Right? Can I start being more intentional about that? Because what happens when we hit that pause button, which is what people do sometime after they get married and they go, we've got to do the kid thing, the work thing, the whatever thing. They hit the pause button, and that's a disconnection. You can't pause a relationship. It's just not possible. It's either going to be growing and expanding or shrinking and dying. Hit the pause button, you're shrinking it, you're killing it. So we've established that. Then it's a question of how much can I add in those pieces and get out of the habit of disconnection that I created with that. That makes sense?
Yeah, total sense. I want to zoom in on why do so many well-intentioned men make things worse by trying to fix instead of regulate themselves first, or just like shut up and listen. Wow, this has been like so hard for me to just. I've heard John Gray and other teachers, Tony Robbins. I even like went through his ultimate relationship program. It's still freaking hard to just like shut up and listen.
Yeah.
And then I listened to the FBI negotiator who has the company Black Swan. Has been on Masterclass and many podcasts. And use the technique with labeling and mirroring. It is basically what ChatGPT does when you are prompting it. And it's always like labeling back and mirroring you, making you feel seen and heard. So I found that like quite useful, but maybe it's an issue on my end why I can't shut up and try to fix things.
So you threw in a couple of things there that I think are important. Let's go back. One is regulation.
Right.
And the other is fixing. So why do lots of men want to fix things? So they regulate themselves. If I'm fixing something, I feel like I have competence. I don't have to deal with the emotional mess that's in front of me. I can just, get to this different place because I'm not okay with emotions in front of me. I mean, that's kind of what's behind a lot of that. So self-regulation is the term for people who are able to not suppress an emotion as much as decide how they're going to express that emotion. So that's the expression piece. But the not fixing, here's the thing that has helped some men I've talked to, is recognizing that you don't have to fix something to fix it. If I listen, that may be the fix. And so if you want to fix it, what if it's just by listening and letting somebody process along and recognizing that there is not a right way to get to the end of a problem? It doesn't have to be I have to just talk through it. That's one way. It doesn't have to be fixed. That's just another. So one way that men, and people in general who find themselves in a fix-it kind of mode often find useful is to ask the question, what do you need from me in this? I just want to be clear. Do you need me to help you fix this, or do you want me just to listen and be here? And that can be relieving because they're often going, am I supposed to fix this? Am I supposed to fix this? Or which time is this? Just to be open about that. Looks like you've had a really rough day. Do you need my help to fix something, or do you want to just talk about it? Simple question.
Yeah. And there you used like labeling. It seems like you had a really rough day. I used this at a hotel because I saw they were like totally stressed. They've had a hard day. They were power shortage, and they weren't even like looking at me when I went to the desk and I was going to ask for help. So I just used that. I was intentional about it. It looks like you had a really long and tough day, because I saw them in the morning and I saw them still working in the evening, and the energy just shifted, and they just got like super nice and super welcoming, and they just, we just got the best service. And it's so funny how people get lit when we just see them, just telling them what we see instead of, I don't know.
That's connection.
Exactly. Connection. The second piece.
If I feel unseen, I feel disconnected. So Martin Buber, philosopher guy, who talked about the fact that we have the it or I thou relationships with other people. I thou is when I see you as a person, right? I want to know what's going on with you. I value you. It is when I'm relating to you transactionally. You are talking with a group of people who feel like they are transactionally seen every day. I am here to make the guest feel happy. I am a transaction for them. I am not a person for them. And somebody said, wait, I see you as a person. And if you've had a rough day, you want that. You want to be seen. You want somebody to go, I get it. It's been a rough day. I'm sorry. And I mean, I think there's a philosophical piece to that. There are times when it really is kind of transactional. If I'm going through the checkout, the person probably doesn't want me to be going in depth on how's your life, what's going on at home. It's just a thank you so much. And to be polite, even in the transaction, is all that is there. But And that's the danger of the it, is that we dehumanize, we make them just the transaction. And so we can even look at how to interact there. But the I thou is what we're trying to build with the spouse instead of, and if you've heard this, many people saying, I just feel like I'm a paycheck, or I just feel like I'm the housemaker. I just feel like I'm the nanny. I just feel, there are lots of pieces of that often happen in marriages where you can see that they feel like they have become the it, not the I value you. I want you to be happy. I want you and me to be in this connection. That's the I-thou connection.
Can you share your thoughts on resentment?
Yeah. So anger, then we'll go two ways on it. Anger is the outward representation of our inner feeling. Anger is out there. It's a secondary emotion to hurt, fear, or threat. When I feel hurt, I feel fearful or threatened, it's likely to come out as anger. If that anger is not addressed, and what I really want addressed is the hurt, but if it's not addressed, it kind of becomes a systemic infection, and that's resentment. Resentment is the unfinished anger that's built up over time because nothing's changed, basically. And what's behind that is still the hurt, the fear, the threat.
And if I've felt that I've been like emotional illiterate almost not my whole life, but for a really long time. How can someone train to be like, what's the opposite of emotional illiterate?
So I think you're talking about...
So I don't build resentment. So when I feel that a boundary has been crossed, or that I'm not fearful of what other people will think. And I've been stuck in people pleaser mode for so many years, being the nice guy and not even knowing what do I want? What are my feelings in these situations?
So where do you think that you learned that?
Yeah, from childhood.
Yeah, and that's not to blame parents as much as to recognize the parents still are doing the best they can, but
Yeah,
many
of
times
course.
don't have the skill either, right? I
Yeah.
have a core belief that people do the best they can given where they are. That doesn't mean they can't do better tomorrow, they can't have done better yesterday, but where they are right now, tired or energized or whatever, they're doing the best they can. That gives me a lot of grace for how somebody is first. But picking up those skills, I mean, we've been talking now for several decades on EQ. Do we have the emotional intelligence quotient to interact? And part of that you named earlier is, can I label how I'm feeling? I mean, that is the first step. I have sat many times with people who, their arms are crossed and they are scowling. And I'm like, you seem to be angry. And I'm not angry. Maybe you don't recognize what is going on, but there's a guardedness here. So let's talk about how you're feeling. And they start noticing that their stomach is tense, their face is clenched, their jaws are clenched. I'm like, those are somatic representations. Our body is telling us that we're having an emotional reaction that you're not noticing, probably because you were never given permission to do that. And that's still back to that regulation piece. Unless you know what's going on, it's hard to regulate what's going on. And so part of that learning the skills of relationships is recognizing you have these emotions. Your spouse, your significant other, your friends, your children, anyone around you is having an emotional reaction too. And when we don't take that into account, we're going to continue to hit those difficult times. But you then added the other piece, which is boundaries. We also learn boundaries at home. And if we don't, we then have to learn them in life. And boundaries are simply what you will not let someone do to you, how you won't let them treat you. There's a lot behind that, but that's the simple interpretation of what is a boundary. I won't let somebody yell at me. I won't let them call me names. I won't let them hit me. I won't let them, unless we're in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
We volunteered to do that, right? But at that point, I've said, that boundary is out the door. And so there are times when we have to say again that I don't want to be treated that way, right? That's what a boundary is. And if you don't hold to boundaries, you can't blame somebody else for violating your boundaries. You haven't been clear about what that is. And that is often true in relationships and even in marriage.
What beliefs or habits are great to have in a functional relationship or a healthy relationship?
Yeah. So belief is we're a team. We've got each other's back. We are the most important relationship here. Another one is I am responsible to show up the best way I can. Those are the beliefs. The habits of connecting are what are important. If we get into the habits of disconnection, it does take effort. And so many times I've suggested to people, why don't you try to be more intentional about physical connection? And I always, or emotional connection, or spiritual connection, any of those, I'll often say it, and they'll say, that just feels so awkward. And my response is, if you're out of the habit of something, it's going to feel awkward no matter what you do. That is the nature of learning, right? So same in jiu-jitsu. There is nothing more awkward than learning a new move in jiu-jitsu. And so what do? You do it until there's a muscle memory to it, right? That's just pickleball. First time I went on the court, most awkward thing I've ever done. I thought, I must look like an idiot. There's only one way to get past that, to look like an idiot long enough to go, okay, I've got this, right? And so that is something that you have to decide, are you willing to risk that in a relationship? And what is interesting to me is people often are so out of the habit that they're afraid of how that's going to be taken by the other person, rather than going, this is important for our relationship. I don't want to be embarrassed. It's different than, I want us to have a great relationship. And that might require me to be a bit awkward. I wouldn't say embarrassed, but a bit awkward when we're trying these new things out.
What are some of the biggest complaints you hear about the partnership, the relationship, from men and from women? Are they different, or are they complaining on the same things?
I mean, there's probably more of a variety among different people than gender, but I often hear from either side, we're no longer physically connected, meaning they're not sexually intimate. They're no longer physically connected. I often hear, I feel like I'm shouldering more responsibility. I feel like I am just needed here for my function, not anything else. I often feel like they're the only thing that they're doing. They could be roommates. All they're doing are the practicalities of what do we do with the kids and what's the schedule look like and how do we deal with the money. Those are some big ones, right? Those are the ones that I hear very often. There are 5 conflict points in marriage: kids, religion and politics, in-laws, money, and sex. Those are the big 5. And they are all reflective of whether you're connected or disconnected. And how you think about those things are based on whether you think of us as a team or you versus me.
Yeah, it's funny when I'm speaking to you, my mind is just racing with all of the with all the memories that are coming up, all the talks that I've had with friends. It feels like this is a topic that it's endless to talk about it.
Well, because it is, for most people, it is considered to be their most important adult relationship, right? And so they're putting, I mean, you take these vows of saying, we're here together until the end. And then we don't treat it like that. I've often said to people, what if you suddenly found that there's this new regulation and you get one car for life? It's it. That one car is all you've got. What are you going to do with that car? And then suddenly they're telling me how they would make sure they took it for regular maintenance. They would make sure that they don't park near somebody who's going to throw the door open. They would wash it and polish it and take care of it and keep it in the garage. And I'm like, that's what you pledged in your wedding vows, to be there for life. It's the one that you committed to. That doesn't mean that there's a prevention of you doing differently, but that is the one. Are you doing that? Are you taking care of it? Are you making sure it's protected? Are you making sure that you give it the maintenance it needs? Or are you parking it outside right next to the truck that's going to throw their door open and waiting until there's smoke coming out before you take it to the mechanic? That's what we do with the marriage often. And so it becomes a topic because when you're counting on that being your most loving relationship and then it's disconnected, it is physically painful, not just emotionally. They've done the MRIs or fMRIs on people who are feeling that disconnection, and it lights up the same area in the brain that is painful physically.
Yeah. Someone who is out of a relationship or hasn't got married yet, is there anything they should be looking for or think about or prepare before they go into a committed relationship?
Yeah, that's a big topic too. But let's talk about the piece of this that is kind of the starting point. Are they attracted to this person? Like, do they really want to get to know this person? And we probably crossed that point. I mean, when I was doing some seriously dating sessions, they had already crossed that point. We were actually trying to get people to have important conversations before they were engaged. Because when you're seriously dating and you go, yeah, this isn't going to go, it's a lot easier to back out than if you've gone, yep, we've paid for the wedding. So yeah, we're going to do that. And so part of what we were having them look at there were several points. 2 of them that I always pointed to was the velocity of their relationship, of their life story, of how fast they want to get somewhere, and the trajectory. So now we're talking about the physics of the relationship, right? Those 2 things: trajectory, velocity. Trajectory, where am I headed? It's like throwing a ball. Where is it going to land? Where am I trying to get to in life? Velocity, how fast do I want to get there? And the question between them is, do we have something of a match there? Is there a way that your trajectory and my trajectory can follow each other and the velocity is the same? So if somebody was like, you know what I want to do is have a bunch of kids and I want them in the next 5 years, and the other's like, I'm not sure I want kids at all. That's a difference in velocity and trajectory. And so they may be attracted to each other, but do they have a common path that they have? And that a lot of those conversations are that spiritual connection piece, because now we're talking about what's really important to us. Another piece that I want them to think about is, how do they as individuals enter into that can I do that? Can I set aside that I don't get what I want all the time, that we actually have to say what's best for us? That's the third option that I often point to. There's what you want, there's what I want, and then there's the third option of what would propel us forward as a relationship together. And sometimes people have gotten to the point, they're in that point in the relationship where they're seriously dating, they're thinking about marriage, and they're like, I'm not really ready to do that. I'm not really ready to give up rights to choose everything I want to do. I want it to go my way. That's an unrealistic expectation if you're entering into a partnership. Same in business, right? And when people say, oh, so you don't want me to do everything I want to do. Well, if you entered into business with somebody, it's the same thing. You're saying, here are the boundaries of what we can expect. So we're going to work together on that. Or maybe you need your own business. Maybe you need to go your own way. So it's the same kind of thing. It's not about giving up on the big things in your life as much as recognizing that you're doing that in a partnership now. And that's a change.
I have this theory, and you might laugh at me right now, but I believe to my core that men and women shouldn't live together. And what I'm basing that on is a book that I read that's called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And on the back of the book, it says like 99.9% of all of human existence has never been the nuclear family. We've always been in a community or a tribe. Are we asking or demanding too much of our partner? Because I feel every summer when we are together with my wife's sisters and our nieces and the cousins and our mothers and neighbors, everything just feels so much easier. Like the pressure with the kids, because we got plenty of people making dinner for the kids, taking care of them. We are just collaborating in a whole nother way. And we got more time for each other in the relationship.
It feels to me like that is more a indictment of the way we do culture, because those relationships are cut off. We're not doing that on a regular basis that maybe our ancestors would have done, because that's just, they live communally. Also, they did communal because that's how you survive. The further we've gotten away from our daily survival, the more that has altered how we do community. So I think there is a lot to be said for how do we do culture? How do we do community? How do we do family? How do we support each other in that? Because I do think that one of the reasons that many families struggle is because it is two people who are maxed out trying to parent and needing help that is no longer an easy fit for that. Just seems like that feels like a cultural indictment, as much as, if not more than, the can men and women live together. It's been quite a while since that has not been true. And so we've changed a lot of our cultural assumptions. And the fact is that for a long time, couples have come back together to at least be in the same home at night together. I just wonder if everything else has changed, how that is possible, not possible.
Yeah, so sharing that makes sense. But spending time together like all day feels like it disturbs the polarity. And can you share what your beliefs are about like the masculine and feminine polarity and the dynamics there? Because you have like David Deda's work that has influenced like the whole Tantra community, also Tony Robbins' work. So we're always like talking about the masculine and feminine polarities. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I think my view is that how a couple thinks about that together is the more important, whether it fits for them or whether they're doing battle about how that fits. And I see a lot more disagreements on the underlying pieces than if they actually agree on what that looks like. So how do they understand that for themselves? I think is very important. How that can be for them can vary. And I think there's a lot of variance that is possible if they're in agreement. That's back to that trajectory velocity thing. If they're in agreement on that, they can work that out. I think there is a lot of discomfort now for people to try to work through what does it mean to be masculine or feminine, and what does that mean in gender roles. But it's whether a couple is on the same page. If they're not on the same page, that's a struggle. And just to kind of wrap around, you talked about when they spend all day together, that does fit into Tony Robbins' thing about sameness. You're not bringing any outside energy to that. That was what the variety did. So sameness gives you predictability. Variety brings you energy. And so this is probably some of the stuff that came from the pandemic. There are a lot of people both people are working at home, and they're in each other's space all the time, and nothing changes throughout the day. That is a change in how we do things.
Did we see a lot of divorces during the pandemic thanks to us being together, locked up in the same household? Or do you recall? Do you know
Oh
anything about
yeah,
that?
yeah. Because so I have programs that are on the internet, and I can track what's happening in them. And I saw two things simultaneously. There were people who went, "Oh, we're in this. Let's be in this together." And there are those who went, "I am done being in this with you," right? And so it was interesting to watch. There, statistically speaking, I've looked at the statistics of it. Right as the pandemic was passing, as communities were opening up, people were divorcing. Before that, some were like, "We can't," right? So there was a pent up thing where they were already under pressure, and this added the pressure. There were also a lot who I saw who went, we can't go our separate ways. How could we do that? We're in our pod together. We got to figure out how to work this out. And so there were just as many people who found new feet for their relationship because they had to, as those who blew apart because they had been forced together. So I think if you look at the statistics right after things opened back up, there was an upshot of divorce, partly because people couldn't do it before.
Interesting. Is there a daily practice or ritual that you suggest to people that you coach that has a great, beautiful impact on the relationship?
Yeah, and it's not a couple thing. So years ago, I created a Thrive journal, and it's a morning and night kind of thing. In the morning, you are setting up your day. How do you want your day to go? How do you want to show up today? What's most important? What are the things you really have to get done? As a kind of a way of setting up your day. And that, if somebody's working on their marriage, setting up how they want to interact in that day would be a piece of that. At night, they come back and they would do how did that go for them? It's a printed book that I also have used in different programs. And so that's designed to be to get you in the habit of thinking, how do I want to show up? Now, notice this isn't a marital activity. It was, how do I want to show up? Just like in your realization that your changes and how you show up change the relationship. And then the evening to say, how did I do? Not as a way of going, well, I just did a really bad day, as much as to go, that didn't work. How do I set up my next day, right? How do I make that go better? And that framing brings in the personal responsibility. It also brings in the awareness of how you're interacting with a spouse that is the cornerstone of anything else. So if you're getting those pieces, then it's easier to say, how do we want to interact? There are couples who find that it's useful to have 15 to 20 minutes at the end of their day to just reconnect, maybe before dinner or after dinner, but to reconnect, not to go over what the kids do today, what's that funny meme you saw today, but what was important to you today? What was a challenge today? What was a high point? What was a low point? Some of those more connecting conversations, which, by the way, are also pretty good conversations to have with the kids at the table, to watch them understand how to process those emotions. But if you're not used to that, it's a safer place to do it within the marriage.
What's a relatively new belief that you have gotten during the maybe last 5 years that has completely shifted how you view relationships and has helped you in your practice as well?
The fundamental importance to our daily health of relationships. I mean, really just watching what happened in the pandemic, that the isolation, the cost of that brought it home. But the research has been there. It's coming out more strongly now that one of the biggest determinants for our health, our mental health only, our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, is relationships. And that's not just on the marriage. The pressure is not just there. It's in our daily relationships. And that has only grown stronger in my understanding, watching us in these last, 5 years, 6 years, that what we react to, what we join with, the importance of that in our lives as I watch people do that is based on the need of that connection. It just cuts across and is so fundamental to human life, to human health. And I don't think I appreciated it. I knew the data. I just don't think I appreciated it until I saw it in such starkness in real time. We actually chose to leave where we lived for 34 years, our entire adult life, to move to be closer to family after the pandemic because we realized how important that was to us.
What advice would you need 30 years back?
That's a
if
tough
you could give an advice to your younger self, what piece of advice about relationship would you have needed?
Probably the the piece that has become more and more important to me is not to worry about what people think of me. That I think I worried more about it, certainly 30 years ago, than I do now. The last probably 10, and now I've been on the internet since my website went live in 1999. So
Wow.
you start developing a tough skin after a while on the internet. So somebody said,
I know.
how do you put up with that? And I said, you know what? Somebody's opinion of me is none of my business. And,
Yeah.
that I wish I had known that 30 years ago, that that's not something I need to get wrapped up in. They're either going to like me or they're not. And that's okay.
Don't you laugh about the comments?
I do. Sometimes I'll share them with my wife and she's like, I don't understand how you do that. But I just like everybody has an opinion and I'm not going to get wrapped up in what they think of me. It's also helped me to stay out of some conversations that are unproductive now on the internet. There's a lot of that too. And if I'm going, I don't really care what you think of me. I don't need to change your mind. You're either going to like what I say or not. And we find the people who are in our camp. And
yeah.
So I think that's an important thing to remind myself of, but for all of us to recognize that.
Yeah. What's a failure or painful experience in your own life that ended up teaching you something essential about marriage or relationship?
So I have been fortunate that we've had a strong marriage for now 38 years. So it's less relational as much as personal. When I was in my mid-30s, I developed they thought it would end my life. I mean, that was the end result. And so it was an illness that most people don't recover from. So I don't even name the illness anymore because people who have it then get hopeful that there is a cure. And the fact is I had the acute version, not the chronic version, but it made me very sick for 8 months. And I knew I would be okay after about the first 4 months when one of the specialists I finally got in with said, I can't help you, but you will recover. So that was a relief because I mean, hearing the doctors up until then, I was going to be in bad shape and eventually it would kill me. So here I am in what I consider to be bonus time. And that's now lasted we're going on 25 years. And so my bonus time is to ask the question, how do I want to leave the world different? Not what do I get out of this, but what do I put into this? How do I leave the world? And that's a pretty big shift for me to ask the question, how can I leave a bigger legacy? And by legacy, I don't mean my name survives as much as that I leave the world a better place.
Great question to live by. I want to dedicate this question to the men out there that are having trouble feeling worthy or loved without being useful.
Yeah.
Because I've gone through periods where I injured myself physically to the point where I was useless at home, in work. Everything from chopping my kneecap with an axe accidentally. I couldn't walk for I don't know how many weeks, injuring my back where I had to lay down for 2 weeks and getting fed on the floor by my wife. And that feeling of not being able to pick up the heavy loads, open the doors, get the kids to school in the car, like the regular things that I'm doing constantly. Or even just like sitting, having a Zoom call when I'm doing my work. That like struggling with that sense that I'm not providing, I'm not taking care of my family right now, I'm not contributing right now, feeling useless. How do you tackle that?
Yeah.
And men who have lost their jobs thanks to AI or thanks to the pandemic and just like being out of work. I sense that a lot now in Sweden. A lot of men out of work. That has been, they've had their own companies, they've been consultants, they've had a huge salary, and all of that is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to see more of that. I mean, that's
for sure.
Right around the corner, we know. And so I think it's a very important question. So let me talk through a couple of things. One is, I talked about my being sick. And when I was sick, I had to trim down my workload, period. But I would go and do the clinical hours I had to do, and I would come home, and that was it. And there were days I couldn't even do that. And so it wasn't me contributing much to the household goods or my kids or anything else. It was all I could do to struggle through just those small pieces. So I recognized that piece. I wasn't completely out, but at that point, I mean, I just finished, we were a few years out of grad school, not long out of grad school. I was still trying to just make sure we were provided for. So I still had to go do those things. So a couple of things. Another piece of this is watching. I had a friend who had ALS, who died from ALS. And one of the quick effects of ALS was he was completely incapacitated. So there's no work. He was dependent on everybody for everything in his life. And what I watched was people still loving him, people still valuing him, people still finding him to be important. And so there is a piece of me that has seen this multiple levels. When I wasn't contributing, my wife was still taking care of me and was still loving me, and my kids were still wanting to sit with me while I was asleep on the couch. To recognize that there are some pieces we can identify of our self-worth that are outside of what we do, just our intrinsic self-worth. And so I often, when I have men talk about that, ask them to turn it around. If it were their son, if it were their father, and they were out of work, not able to do it, how would they feel about them? Would they see them as useless? Would they see them as worthless? Not once have I had one tell me that they would see their parent, their child, as worthless if they were unemployed and couldn't take care of themselves. Everyone has been able to tell me about the valuation they would place on that person. So then we have to just turn it on ourselves and recognize if we can see that, for other people, that is probably the more honest piece, that people would also still treasure us, still love us, still be a part of that. And if they don't, that was a transactional relationship already. They were already there only for the secondary gain. And that tells you something. I mean, it clears it out. When there is a problem and your friends leave your side, you've already clarified who's a friend. When there's a problem and you lose family, you've already clarified who is there for you and who is not. So there is some clarification that might happen, but that might be some useful clarification. And so to be able to look in that mirror and go, okay, I would value those people, so I will be valued, and then to work on what really is important to me. What is fundamentally important to me? What do I want to leave behind given where I am? It's the growth mindset, Carol Dweck's idea of the growth mindset. The growth mindset question is, given this, what's now possible?
Yeah.
Wherever you are in life, that question still stands.
Love that answer. We've talked about how to fix a marriage or fix yourself. How do you know this is unfixable?
Yeah.
It's time to leave. This is not going to work. How do you know?
Yeah, so you asked me a question. You didn't ask me a question that I often get, and I appreciated you not asking it, so I'm going to ask it of myself, right?
What's the question?
Is every marriage savable? I'm the Save the Marriage guy. That is the program I developed, is Save the Marriage, right?
Yeah.
So people ask, so you think every marriage is savable? And my response is absolutely not. There are some that are too far gone. So first of all, there are relationships that have abuse in them. They should not be saved. When there's abuse there, that is not the time to save a marriage. That's a time to make sure that everybody is safe. So that's the first thing. That trims off some. And then you've got the ones that have been on pause for so long that there is no connection left anymore. It's like, so since you're jujitsu, I'll use this analogy. When you're doing a rear naked choke, if they don't tap soon enough, they will pass out. But if you let go when they pass out, they will revive unless you keep hanging on. And eventually you will not just choke them to unconsciousness, but you will choke them to death. So we were constantly told, as soon as a person slacks, or even if you think they're going to, let go. And I had a little sneaky move that was a one-sided choke from the mount that I often used. And the thing that was sneaky about it is they didn't see it coming. When you're in a rear naked choke, you're in trouble. But this one was real sneaky, and I would watch them glaze over, and I would just let go. And they would immediately, revive. They weren't even aware of it. People watching would be aware of it, but they weren't. And that's the sneaky part of this. If I'd held on too long, even on a half choke, they would eventually be unrecoverable. And so it's the same with a relationship. If you put the pause button too long, if you disconnect too long, there's just nothing left to revive. There's no willingness, there's no connection there. And here's the telling part, there's only one way to find out if that is the case, and that is to try.
And if you try and nothing happens, like no connection, you don't feel anything, it just continues that, then it's completely dead and we should just say goodbye.
So yes, there's a question of when you do that. So we'll just stick with the whole heart and circulation thing. I worked in the hospital when I was at the beginning of my career as a chaplain, and so I watched this many times when they would call a code, right? The chances are in many cases you knew the outcome already. But there was nobody who was willing to stand around and just assume that. They were going to see what was possible, right? They were going to do CPR as long as possible. And how long they were going to do it, that varied. But I was pretty clear that everybody in the room was going to work until they could say, I did everything I could. I can look in the mirror and feel good about this, as opposed to someone who might have gone, maybe we should have tried this or this, right? And so part of that try is to be able to walk away going, I feel good about what I did. I tried my best. One of the things you can't go back on is the regret. That's a long time when people walk away going, I should have done more, and they feel regret. That can last into the next relationship. That can haunt them for a long time. But if they did everything they could and they go, I'm at the point where I'm not willing to do more, that's the time that they can walk away and go, I feel good about what I did. Since there are many times there are kids involved, it's not like they're going to get rid of this person, but they might make a more productive co-parenting relationship if they've worked through the issues that got them there.
Great advice. If you had to invest $10,000 into one thing to improve a struggling marriage, and it's not therapy and it's not coaching, what would you spend it on?
Oh, gosh. Since there's so little of what I talk about that has a price tag to it at all, right? What does it cost? This is one of those where I do think it is possible for a couple to say, what's our big dream? What can we work on together? And it doesn't have to be $10,000, but having a joint project, whatever that is, can be one of those places where you say, we're working on this as a team. We're back in this together. Having a project. I'll often have a couple I don't like the bucket list idea, but the life list. What do I want to do in life? What do I want to accomplish? And then they start looking at each other's life list and they're like, we have that in common.
Yeah.
It may not be $10,000, but that'd be worthwhile to invest on together because you have it on your joint list. There are two other areas. One is the ones where you go, I don't want to do that, but I'd support you doing that. And the other one are really the therapeutic question is when you go, no, I won't support you doing that. No, I don't want to be a part of that, and what those are about. But those are pretty rare. When most couples do this little exercise, they find out that there are either the things they want to do together or the things they'll support each other in doing. We've already created this whole new structure now, right? If I say I want to do this and my spouse says, well, what can I do to support you? That's pretty connecting. If it's I want to do this and my spouse says, I'd love to do that too, that's pretty connecting. So that's where I would put that money.
Yeah, I totally agree with that answer. That was on point. And I'm not going to go into my own stories about it because of the time. So I want to wrap this up in a great way. And I want to have you on more times because there are so many things to speak about when it comes to this topic. Yeah. First of all, thank you, because from this short talk, you've given me new insights that I haven't touched on before. And I've gone through many, many, many relationship programs. I'm just telling you that.
No, thanks.
So for the person listening right now who feels alone in their effort, discouraged, or unsure whether it's even worth trying anymore, what's the first small but powerful action they can take this week or right now today that starts shifting the relationship system?
Yeah. So, we've probably pounded this to death, but what do I need to change about how I show up would be a piece. Just what small things can I do to show up? But I just want to point to looking at those three targets that we created: physical, emotional, spiritual. Let's just name it let's take the two bottom ones, emotional and spiritual. What can I do to foster a little more physical connection this week? What can I do to foster a little more emotional connection? Meaning, how can I make my spouse or help my spouse feel like I get them, that I support them? Those two things are often radical turnarounds if you're in a disconnected relationship.
And when, let's say a man, for example, you give them that advice and they say, okay, how should I touch them? They're completely illiterate to how to touch people.
So it's always one step beyond where you are right now. If you are not touching at all, to walk by and pat them on the shoulder may be all you can do.
Yeah.
If you're giving each other a quick side hug on the way out the door, A kiss may add to that, or a full body hug might add to that. So I always suggest that wherever the connection is right now, you're just looking for the next step up. You're not going,
all right.
This is not the home run, right? First base. This is just getting the next little piece of connection you can get in. Otherwise, you unbalance the system too quickly.
Thank you for that distinction. Oh, man. So if someone wants to go deeper with you, your work, learn your frameworks, or reach out to you directly, where's the best place for them to find you?
So I've got a page that has 3 things on it, and I want to distinguish them. If you go to savethemarriage.com/podcast, so savethemarriage.com/podcast, but since we're on a podcast, that gives you 3 things. One is it's access to my Save the Marriage system. There is a program that you can use if you think your marriage is in trouble and needs to be saved. There are a lot of relationships that are just chronically hurting. And that's why I created the Unpause app, which is actually an app on the phone. And the Unpause app is designed to help you break the disconnection habits. There's education and other pieces to that. There's a link to that also. A lot of people aren't quite sure. And so it's called my GPS relationship assessment. And it basically tells you whether you've got a green light, which should be no problem getting this back together. A yellow light, meaning there are complications to this. You shouldn't have a lot of problem. Or a red light, meaning there's going to be some big complications you need to be mindful of. It doesn't mean you can't save it, but there's a lot more in the way. That assessment link is on that page too. So that gives you kind of the range. If you're saving your marriage or just wanting to improve it, those 2, or I don't even know, there's an assessment to help you figure that out.
Great. Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your wisdom, doing the work that you do, because I truly believe that this brings more peace to the world when you have peace, harmony, and a loving relationship, because I've been on both sides and I know exactly how it feels to be in a just crappy relationship, and how it feels when you are inspired, you are feeling that you're a team, and you are going towards a common goal together, and you have a project together, and you have the same velocity. You're not dragging a donkey, as my mom always says, because she's Egyptian and there are a lot of donkeys on the streets, and you don't want to be dragging a donkey, guys.
That's so true.
So the velocity metaphor just like completely made sense for me. I love that. So thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So I'm just going to stop. I want to be really clear with something. This podcast doesn't grow because of me. It grows because you choose to follow it. Every time you do, it gives the show a little bit more reach, a little bit more weight. And that's what opens doors to deeper conversations and remarkable guests. So if you haven't followed yet, consider this an invitation, not to support me, but to help shape what this becomes. We're building something for people who want to live deliberately, think freely, and create life on their own terms. If that resonates, you're already part of it. Hit follow, and thank you for carrying this with me. I want to give you some value in this podcast, and thank you for listening. So let me give you something useful right now. Most men don't struggle because they're weak. They struggle because they're unclear. So not being clear. That's why I built the Manhood Mastery Quiz. It takes only 2 minutes, and it shows you exactly where you're crushing it and where life is crushing you, and what actually deserve your focus next. So you will get instant results, no email rabbit hole, just a clear snapshot of your life as a man today. Take the quiz, links in the show notes. Clarity is power, and power changes everything.